Hello everyone, it's Theme Park Avenue, I'm Eric. Welcome to Epic Universe Reviews, a series of videos reviewing each of the 11 rides of the all-new Universal's Epic Universe theme park at Universal Orlando Resort. In each video, I will talk through my experience on one of the rides, provide useful information about it, and give some final thoughts on how good the ride is. For the 11th and final video in this series, I'm reviewing the one, the only, Harry Potter and the Battle at the Ministry. Spoilers incoming. If you ask everybody who went to Epic Universe what their favorite ride is, I think the winner would for sure be this ride. Battle at the Ministry is already highly acclaimed, even being called the best theme park ride in the world by some. It is easy to see why people are so impressed by it. The technical aspects are some of the very best on any dark ride, and there are some mind-blowing moments. I'm not easily wowed by dark rides, but this ride definitely has some fantastic segments I greatly enjoyed, and I might consider them some of the best in any dark ride. However, the impressive elements can only take the ride so far, and I have a lot of issues with the experience that range from minor presentation elements to massive conceptual flaws that make the whole thing less interesting than it could have been. So in addition to a spoiler warning, I will be adding a Ministry fan trigger warning. If you already love the ride or you're watching a spoiler review but you're still hyped for the experience, you will likely find some of my critiques nitpicky and insignificant. That's fine. The things I dislike about a theme park ride should not influence how you feel about it. That said, I will now talk through the full ride experience and explain what I think makes the ride great and also what makes it fall short of excellence. I got in line for this ride after getting on 9 of the 11 rides at the park, and I waited 2 hours. Once the ride began, I was super excited. Sadly, just as the action was about to begin, the ride shut down. I've discussed this experience before on my Epic Universe guide video about getting everything in one day, but basically I got off 40 minutes later and I received a single-use express pass. I used it on this very ride about 2 hours later. So basically it was a reset, and the second attempt is my true Battle at the Ministry experience. Nothing on the first experience really influenced my opinion on the ride, but getting stuck was certainly a fun experience. Seeing behind the scenes is always awesome, but now, let's actually review the ride. The entrance experience has an issue I've mentioned before. There's not a huge sign with the ride's name on it outside of the entrance. If you know what the area looks like in advance, you'll be fine. But the building blends in with Wizarding Paris quite well, and the land is fairly expansive. You may struggle to find out where you're supposed to go at first, but I believe there are some small signs pointing you in the right direction, and there is a small sign with the ride's name right outside the entrance. This entrance thing does not take away from the ride for me at all, but I think others may prefer this system and like the ride even more for it. When there's no entrance sign, the ride doesn't feel like a ride as much. It feels like you're just entering a Wizarding World building, so you feel a little more immersed in the land. I don't feel that way at all because I know I'm at a theme park and immersion is not something that generally speaks to me. But I do get why they didn't make a huge sign. Once you actually enter, things kinda kick into high gear. The building is dubbed métro-floo. For those who don't know, floo powder is a magical substance in Harry Potter that when thrown into a fireplace, I believe, can teleport you to a location of your choice. I kinda thought Diagon Alley Universal Studios would use floo powder, but I guess the foot traffic there is a bit too high. Ultimately, using it on this ride was very smart. The idea here is that you start in Paris and take the métro-floo, a public transit system involving floo powder, back to London's very own Ministry of Magic. I believe métro-floo is original to this ride, and frankly, I find it brilliant. Walking through the tunnel as green smoke appears to obscure your view until you're in the Ministry is a great way to send you to a completely new location into the ride queue. The only issue is that the events of the ride take place 60 years after the films that the Wizarding Paris is based on. So technically you just teleported 60 years into the future while going through floo powder. That's a weird quirk, but it's not something that really bothers me. I think you'd have to be a massive Potterhead to really get bothered by that. I should mention I'm not that knowledgeable on Harry Potter. I've read some of the books and that's it, but I know a few things and I will be giving that knowledge as we go throughout this. Anyway, you enter the Ministry of Magic in London, and this is perhaps one of the highlights of the whole experience. The main room in the Ministry is enormous in a way no other dark ride queue, or ride queue in general, as far as I know, is. The statues are grand. The ceiling is so high that a dragon couldn't bump its head on it. There are so many offices with props inside where they could have just closed the windows, but they went all out. It's gorgeous, and if you don't want to wait for the ride but want to see this room, the single rider line doubles as a Ministry viewing access point. You can walk through, enjoy the room, and exit the way every rider does. I took the single rider line on my first attempt, and I love how far you can walk in before you're actually corralled into line. At that point, it doesn't even feel like a waiting area. You just feel like you're walking through a really large lobby. In this lobby, there's also a poster of Dolores Umbridge, and it's through this poster that we learn that we are at the Ministry to see this character, who is a secondary antagonist from Harry Potter, stand trial following the death of Lord Voldemort. I suppose she aligned with his views or maybe tried to help him or something, but you can enjoy the ride without actually knowing what she did. You just have to know that she's the villain. I did know going in that she was a very hated character, and just the way she acts in the moving wanted poster gives you that idea quite nicely. She's instantly hateable, very easy to grasp just from this first room alone. Admittedly, I was concerned about Umbridge being the main villain. The previous Harry Potter Dark ride, Escape from Gringotts, which is a roller coaster technically, had Voldemort himself as the villain. Umbridge seems more like a secondary antagonist. She's less intimidating and presumably less powerful. I'll talk about whether or not she works later on. So once you're in the Ministry, you'll likely pass through several rooms before getting on the ride. Let's talk about some of them. There's a rotunda with more offices that look quite nice, and they feature wanted posters of some other villains on this ride known as Death Eaters, a group that worship Voldemort or something like that. I will note, these wanted posters have a very annoying quirk, where they reset through hard cuts every time, and the different shots cut different times. I think if they were in sync, and maybe faded out together and then faded back in, kinda like Umbridge's big poster, it would look a lot better. Still, this room is nice otherwise. There's another room with some sort of moving mural, and that's pretty stylish, and another nearby detail in this room is one of my favorite parts of the whole queue. It's a poster listing prohibited items in the Ministry. It's not hats and phones like you might expect on a theme park ride. It's magical items from Harry Potter like invisibility cloaks. There's fun jokes on this sign, and most of them are pretty easy to understand even with minimal knowledge of the franchise. That's great. There are a few rooms with talking portraits similar to Forbidden Journey, and they're still decently fun, but I didn't really stick around long enough to hear what they said. Then there's an enormous waiting area you'll probably be in for a while. But you can enjoy what looks like a break room, where there's some weird looking stacks of cups, and a magical vacuum that was not working when I went. There's also a locker room with more Easter eggs, I'm sure, but not much to say there. The next part is beautiful, but I'm not entirely sure what it is. The green and purple tiles of the Ministry become pink, and everything is kind of a mess. I believe the room belonged to Umbridge. I mainly make that assumption because of the next room though, which contains an animatronic of Higgledy, Umbridge's former personal house elf. I didn't catch most of what she says, but I was enjoying the stellar architecture of this room, the many props, and the magic feather duster. After this, you pass some more wanted posters and reach the loading area. Before we talk about the loading experience, here are some final thoughts on the queue. I really like how non-linear it feels. The whole thing does seem like a large building you're just walking through. You could easily get lost among these rooms if there weren't constant switchbacks, and that's a very fun feeling. My biggest issue with the queue is that it may be too big for its own good, and has inconsistent levels of detail as a result. I don't want to be too hard on it, it probably is the greatest room of any queue ever built, but the room with the water cups feels very empty. This is most apparent compared to other major Harry Potter queues. Forbidden Journey takes you through Hogwarts Castle, and there's always something to look at. Gringotts also just seems to have more going on in general, and the more interesting rooms are the largest ones, whereas this one's second biggest room falls a bit flat. I think this queue seems a little less interesting than the other Harry Potter ones, just because the Ministry is a less interesting building in general. The walls are tile, there are very few pillars, and the most impressive statue doesn't come close to the chandeliers of Gringotts in my opinion. Ultimately, that's a nitpick. I don't factor in the queue design that much anyway, and at most amusement parks it doesn't matter at all to me. However, Universal aims to make their queues a part of the ride experience, and this is where I think the queue struggles most. Thinking about Gringotts, that ride's queue really does set up the story. Here, the queue feels kind of disconnected, because there's nothing that hints at the trial possibly going wrong. The conflict is kind of supposed to be a big shock as we get on. Everything we learn about in the queue is just Umbridge being on trial, an event that kind of just stops 20 seconds into the ride. Gringotts is also about going to a place where things end up going wrong, but that queue does set up the fact that Harry Potter is there and about to go on a big mission. That conflict is explained in the queue, not so much here. Maybe I missed it, but that is the reason why I think Gringotts overall is a superior queue. But that is enough queue talk. this is still one of the best queues out there. Let's talk about what really matters, the ride. Battle of the Ministry begins with you boarding this weird floating elevator that has 14 seats. Front row seats ideal, but you can see everything regardless of where you sit. Also, these seats may look like an expensive leather, but they're not. Don't get your hopes that this will be super comfortable. As is, the vehicles are good and they fit in the Ministry quite well. Before departing, employees told everyone not to cross their legs and also said to have good posture because it's a courtroom. I think the posture thing is actually not a safety thing at all, and just a fun little joke that the employees say to sell the fact they're not ride operators. Honestly, I love that. A fun little joke right before the experience really starts. I think it's a great beginning. And now, you depart. The moment you enter the actual ride, there is something major I have to address. The screens. I've been very hard on the Harry Potter ride screens in the past. I find them completely unconvincing for Forbidden Journey, and certain scenes on Escape from Gringotts are uncanny. Voldemort looks twice his normal size at some points. Here, I can't complain. Maybe it's because we're further from the screens, or maybe technology has just improved that much. But these screens look great and very convincing. There was not a single moment where I thought things looked off. So congrats Universal for solving the biggest problems on both of the previous Harry Potter rides. It's nice to start with some praise, but just seconds later I have an issue with this ride. The first thing we see is a bunch of elevators like the vehicle we're in but without seats. We see one with some random people in it, and one of them says, "Can you believe Dolores Umbridge is finally on trial?" And the other one says, "It's about time she stood in front of the wizards," or whatever. This sucks. I'm sorry. That is stupid, forced, pointless exposition. Why in the wizarding world would these characters be saying that as if they weren't already headed to a courtroom? It feels so weird. Why would a guy say that to another person he presumably hasn't met? If he had met her, they would have already discussed this. If he hasn't met her, what a weird thing to randomly say. Additionally, we, the rider, already know she's on trial. We don't need to hear that again. And some of you might say it's for single riders who skip the queue, but no. Nobody is skipping the giant poster that says Umbridge trial today. Additionally, the very next scene is Harry, Hermione, and Ron talking to you about the trial. Why did we have these random wizards say stuff we already knew? If you want to have dialogue to make the first scene more lively, have them say something interesting. I know this is unnecessary for some of you, but I don't care how expensive your dark ride was to build, no amount of flashy effects can cover up bad writing. I suppose there are technically some scenarios where the guy could have said this line, but regardless, it doesn't do anything for the viewer. I have to assume that those who call this the best dark ride in the world find this moment very neutral, if they even remember it at all. I do know it's kind of insignificant, but some of the best dark rides in the world are greatly aided by stellar writing that naturally works its way into the story. Heck, Monsters Unchained is an exposition line where Igor says, "They're all out, even the really ugly one." This is something that guests can infer on their own, but they don't necessarily know it, and it's followed by an instantly quotable joke. This line on Ministry adds nothing and only leaves me cringing at how blunt it is. That's enough criticism for one line. On to the next scene. Here, there's a physical elevator with screens behind it and around it to sell the idea the elevator is moving through the halls. There are also screens in the elevator showing the main Harry Potter characters and Higgledy. This looks fantastic. It's a very fun mix of physical sets and screens. I like looking at that trick a lot, especially since I know what it looks like when the screens are shut down. However, I have another complaint. This one was harder for the park to work around and it's more excusable, but it's the fact that the people we see on the screen are not the actual original actors. I believe none of the main three actors recorded lines for this either. I'm not too knowledgeable on the original performances, but the moment Harry started speaking I thought, that's not Daniel Radcliffe. They had someone do an impression, and it just doesn't sound right. The delivery is unnatural and almost creepy. Granted, it's also just not a very good delivery or a good line. Harry says, "And we can't be late, I don't want to miss this." It would be really nice if they could improve the writing here, and this time the delivery just isn't doing it any favors either. So the first 20 seconds of the ride is riddled with poor and pointless dialogue. These scenes themselves were necessary for setting up the elevator system and the main characters, but I wish the dialogue added anything to the cool effects that we're seeing. Anyway, right after this the ride gets a lot better. There's a sound and a shake as the main characters wonder what's going on. We then pull in front of the elevator that Umbridge is in, and we see her and a Death Eater successfully beat the guards. I have to give credit here. This scene is perfect. The elevator stops, so I thought it was surrounded by physical sets. But then it started going up and the walls followed. so it has to be screens. The ride completely fooled me and had me believe the screens were real things. Additionally, Umbridge makes one heck of a first impression. Imelda Staunton, the original Umbridge actress, reprised her role, and wouldn't you know it, she gives by far the best performance of the ride. Her dialogue is stupid, obnoxious exposition stuff, but her pompous voice and cartoonishly evil tendencies make it work so well. She says out loud, "To the time room," like she was Batman going to the Batmobile. And when this dialogue is coming from a ridiculous villain and not casual conversation, it works, especially with a very talented actress behind it. So yeah, pretty stellar beginning to the main conflict of the ride. I could note that when I wrote it, the audio was not synced, meaning Umbridge's lips did not match her speech. But I didn't really care. I still found this moment to be quite great. Umbridge also has the Death Eater Yaxley use a spell on us to knock the elevator backwards. We tumble around to the next scene. At this point, Harry slows down our vehicle with some magic spell, and we get some more exposition from the main characters. Fortunately, this part makes a lot more sense. Umbridge escaping is completely new information, and it makes sense that not everybody in Harry's elevator would know what's going on. We know Umbridge escaped because we just saw it happen, and we know she says to the time room, but we didn't necessarily know that she was after a time turner like Ron says here, so the exposition actually quite works. I should note, this scene is basically exactly like the last two. You sit in front of the physical elevator with the characters in it in the screen, and the effect loses a little luster. It's still well done, but I'm more neutral on this scene than that second one. Still, a net positive. And the next scene might be the best on the whole ride. You enter the Ministry Archives and see a Death Eater in a wizard's duel with Hermione. On its own, that's standard dark ride stuff. But this scene is elevated by the Death Eater being an animatronic on a physical platform, while Hermione is on a screen. This is something I've wanted to see on dark rides for a while. Physical characters interacting with screen ones. It's a dream come true. The Death Eater is a wide range of motion, and the fact their face is covered means the park didn't have to focus on mouth movements. They can invest in realistic motions in the arms and body. The set is enormous, and the screen blends perfectly. Truly, I forgot that Death Eater was an animatronic at points. It just blends in an impressive way that I can't find any faults in. The scene is quite dynamic. That Death Eater takes multiple shots, one after another, so it's not only visually impressive, but also well choreographed. You move closer to the Death Eater as they try to stop you, but some ghosts appear and they say something and distract it, I think. I couldn't really make out what they were saying. After this, you continue through the archives and encounter another Death Eater, this one kind of battling Harry. The set remains grand, but the Death Eater really just stands there and does nothing meaningful until we start to get away. Therefore, this scene is not nearly as well thought out as the previous and also is less impressive. The Death Eater just doesn't interact at all, not even with the screens. But still, that first scene with the Death Eater is breathtaking. Now we enter the Department of Magical Creatures. I have no idea why Umbridge went there. If you know the reason, comment down below and I will pin it because I honestly can't think of any reason why she would end up in that department. While here, she traps Higgledy, says to the time room again, further confusing me as to why she stopped here, and then sends you down a level that presumably had a bigger drop in the past, but oh well. And you see a giant rhino-like creature. I looked it up, the creature is called an erumpent. It's apparently weighing up to a ton, but after seeing that thing, a ton has to be a gross underestimate. Anyway, the erumpent runs around and tosses you into the air with its horn, and this scene illustrates perhaps the single largest issue with the ride. I've critiqued minor things so far, like poor dialogue and uninteresting staging, but there is a consistent problem throughout much of this ride. That is that I never felt like I was actually there. The erumpent scene is the best example. When you get tossed in the air, it doesn't feel like your vehicle is getting thrown. It feels like you're watching the camera angle change in front of you. This is a shame because one of the greatest strengths of the other Harry Potter dark rides is making you feel like you're in the action. On Gringotts, you're on a roller coaster track, so when you're pulled by a dragon or pushed by the Iron Giant, you feel that movement, and you're actively being moved by the things happening on screen. Forbidden Journey isn't really convincing on the screen parts, but the robot-armed ride system means that when you get up close to one of the animatronic things, you quickly change course in a way that makes you feel like you really are there. On this ride, even things like getting shot by the Death Eater at the very start, and then moving backwards, feel disconnected from each other. In general, it just doesn't feel like you're actually there. The erumpent is the worst one. It's the most dependent on the screen, and that is kind of why I think that is the worst scene. But throughout the ride, I feel like I'm just watching things play out in front of me. It's like being seated for a movie except the characters happen to be talking to you. So I guess it's like watching Dora the Explorer. I don't know if the ride system is the issue, maybe having a back corner seat is the reason why I was like that. If you rode this and didn't have that issue, let me know what seat you were in. Maybe that seat could be why. But I'm not sure it is though, because the ride vehicle feels a lot like a motion simulator. And I think it was conceptually a bad call if they wanted to make you feel like you were in the action. I liken it to Skull Island Reign of Kong. But even that one's better because there's screens on multiple sides of you, whereas this one is only straight ahead. I don't think this ruins the ride, and I don't hate the erumpent scene, but the fact that I didn't feel like I was in the action made the ride less interesting and engaging, and it might be the biggest difference between my ride experience and that of those who love this ride. After this scene, you turn 180 degrees and look at a wall for 5 seconds. This part annoys me a little, as even though it's a very minor dip in excitement, everybody's giving Monsters Unchained so much flack for this exact same kind of thing. I recognize that the backstage might be a bit more obvious on Monsters Unchained's transitions, but this gave the exact same energy as the worst moments on Monsters for me. Granted, that's a minor thing, and it's not like I was super excited leading into it anyway. Next, we come across a grand erumpent animatronic. It's beautiful, and it feels like Universal was just flexing here, but I'm very happy this scene exists. I was confused as to how the erumpent ended up on a wall facing the way it was, because it meant it would have had to run through the previous room, go around another, and crash through a wall on the opposite side. I think the idea is that we're leaving the previous room and then just arriving to the other side of the wall, but it doesn't feel like that because you spin around very obviously and stare at that wall for a while. The extended break does kind of ruin that. When Universal Beijing's ride did this thing where you have the animatronic on one side and then you're going to the screen on the other, you don't turn around. The animatronic and screen are on the same side of the room to avoid that issue. Maybe it wasn't feasible here and the creatives did the best they could, but either way, the animatronic is great. The dialogue from Harry and friends here returns to unnecessary exposition, and Ron says, "Let's get out of here before this thing explodes," or similar. Which is a lot of words to speak for someone trying to escape an exploding capsule. I would say that is a bad line of dialogue. I also kinda wish we got to see the elevator explode, but maybe it does and I just missed it because I was sitting furthest away from it. Next scene is Umbridge and Higgledy in the time room. That is where the third act of the ride really begins. Umbridge announces she's going back to Voldemort's time and she has some great deliveries like, "You're too late," and "nonsense." She tries to repair a broken time turner and then shatters them all, and somehow there's an entire wormhole opening up in the time room. As that starts, Umbridge yells directly at us, "This is your fault." That was the moment that made me feel like I was actually playing a role in the story, and it's such a funny one. I actually did laugh out loud when she said it. It's perfectly in character, and it was entirely unnecessary to the story. It just makes the ride more entertaining, and that's what I love. The next room is gargantuan. It shows the Ministry in disarray as the wormhole stuff happens. I have to admit, this part's awesome. The way the pendulums swing towards you really make it feel like they're actually there, even though they are on the screen. The sound design is also fantastic. You hear bells going off in an ominous yet beautiful way, with some reverse effects put on them to really sell that whole time thing. This is another of the best overall scenes on the ride, both in terms of scale and presentation. It's also somewhat unique because the other Harry Potter rides don't really deviate from the source material, but I don't think the unraveling of space and time is something that really happens in the books, so it's interesting. Next up, we see an Umbridge animatronic for the first time, and I have to point out another issue here. This animatronic just doesn't look right. Its movements as fluid as any other one, but the face is jarringly different from the real Umbridge. Her eyes are lifeless, worsened by the fact that you're so far away from it. The face issue is not a problem for the Death Eaters because they wear masks, and also not for Higgledy because she's a computer-generated character. Animatronics haven't really mastered human faces necessarily, and this Umbridge animatronic falls into that uncanny valley, most notable when paired with the expressive voice work. Anyway, Higgledy somehow steals Umbridge's wand. I'm not really sure how it happened, but she says out loud, "Now Higgledy has your wand," and I am somewhat grateful she spelled it out for us. Umbridge then gets sucked into the wormhole through a clever transition between the animatronic and screen. Harry and Ron are also there now, and then they grab Umbridge. Harry responds to another villainous line by saying, "You must not tell lies, Professor." This is a great callback to the books that I am familiar with. I won't explain it here because someone else definitely understands it better than I do and can do a better explanation, but it is a satisfying moment. This scene's another where I didn't actually feel like I was there, It just seems like you're watching things happen on the wormhole. But it's still pretty fun. Then the wormhole closes and everything goes black. Next thing you know, we're in the courtroom with Umbridge, Ron, and Harry. I was baffled. How did they get there after being sucked into a wormhole? I know time travel is not perfectly explained in most media, but it seems to me that the characters were all trapped in there. It's a bit of a shock, but either way, we're in the next room and I will praise the ride for getting us there the way it did. We turned counterclockwise, presumably facing back where we had come from, and then the courtroom's there. I'm not sure how they got us there without us seeing what was behind us in previous scenes. So props. But this is a good scene overall with some fine dialogue and a fun effect that changes Umbridge's dress to a prison one. The characters are all animatronics, but once again, Umbridge is the only one that stands out because the other ones sort of hide their faces. Smart move. Then, you get your photo, Higgledy lies by saying you helped save the Ministry, Hermione waits for an uncomfortable amount of time, and so ends the supposed best dark ride in the world. Overall, I very much enjoyed Harry Potter and the Battle of the Ministry. The many environments you get to see are creative and well executed. The ride is grand in scale. Umbridge serves as a fantastic and memorable villain for the ride, and the screen usage is honestly game-changing. This ride will hold up for years to come, and it will influence many dark rides in the future, no doubt. However, while I was riding, I was certainly bothered by the lackluster script and occasionally bland sequences. I recognize that more feels like a movie complaint than a theme park one, but a well-executed story can really improve a dark ride. For example, The Amazing Adventures of Spider-Man at Islands of Adventure is my favorite dark ride. It has game-changing screen usage and impressive effects, but also a hilarious script and non-stop action that enhances the story. On this ride, Imelda Staunton really did all the heavy lifting when it came to memorable lines. Even so, nothing on this ride compares to "We haven't lost anyone yet, not this week anyway," or "Welcome to Gringotts, the safest place on Earth," from the previous Harry Potter rides. I feel like while the ride is very grand and impressive, Battle of the Ministry lacks personality because of those story issues. Additionally, I simply can't ignore the fundamental flaw that seems to be tied to this ride system. The other Epic Universe dark rides make you feel like you're really there in the middle of the action. Ministry feels like a very passive experience to me. That issue makes Ministry just less fun to ride than it could have been. I know my take will disappoint some of you. You're certainly hoping that everyone loves the ride, including me. And I do like it. The good scenes more than outweigh the bad, and the best technical aspects are some of the best on any dark ride. But it's immensely handicapped by the fact that it just seems like you're looking at stuff from so far away. So as you might have guessed, I don't think this is the best dark ride in the world. I don't think it's the best dark ride in the park. I would call it better than Forbidden Journey and Escape from Gringotts, mainly because the ride experience is consistently engaging comparatively, and these screens are a drastic improvement. That said, there are major things those rides do better than this one. If you think it's the best dark ride in the world, that is great, and I can definitely see why so many are that impressed by it. I think this ride is definitely worth riding once if you have time at the park. But unless the wait time falls to 45 minutes, I'm probably never riding it again. To end this review, I will be giving the ride a number score out of 10. A 1 means it is among the absolute worst of Universal attractions such as Fast and Furious Supercharged, a 10 means it is among the absolute best, such as Velocicoaster or Spider-Man. Those scores are just my opinion, as is the score for Battle of the Ministry. I will be giving Battle of the Ministry a 1 out of 10, I'm just kidding. I will be giving it an 8 out of 10. It's no doubt a great dark ride with plenty of fun moments and plenty of breathtaking ones, but there are many things about it that just aren't for me. And that concludes Epic Universe Reviews. Thank you for watching and I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to check out the other 10 reviews if you haven't already, stay tuned for a full ride ranking and plenty of other videos about Epic Universe, and watch some of the hundreds of other videos already on my channel. Subscribe for more theme park videos. I'll see you next time.